welcome to the first virtual cafecito of this year, 2025. We're very excited that all of you have joined us today. My name is Natalie de la Torre Salas, and I work with the Florida Public Archaeology Network, the Southwest region. And I'm very happy and glad that we're here to spend this time together. Today's cafecito is titled Arroz con Habichuelas, Food Sovereignty and the Historical Legacies of Imperialism in Puerto Rico. And we'll be diving into a very important and timely conversation about food, history, and power in Puerto Rico and how archaeology and anthropology help us better understand these connections. So it is my pleasure to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Dr. Natasha Fernández-Preston, a historical anthropologist and archaeologist originally from Puerto Rico. She earned her Ph.D. in anthropology from the University of California, Berkeley, and has held fellowships with the National Science Foundation, the Society of Ethnobiology, and the Mellon Mays program. Her research focuses on food and power dynamics in the Caribbean, with special attention to food sovereignty, political economy, social and environmental justice, and decolonization. Natasha is also CEO of Cocina Las Ancestras in Puerto Rico, which is a nonprofit working towards food justice and sovereignty through free meals, educational cooking programs, and community gardening, especially for communities with limited access to healthy, culturally relevant foods. So we're very honored to have her with us today to share her work. And Natasha, thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass it over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Natalie, for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here. Today, Natalie already introduced me, so I don't have to do that again. But today, my talk is going to be focused on rice and beans, which is related to the larger project that I did for my dissertation. And yeah, please let me know if any questions come up during the process. So first off, I'd like to start. And also apologies in advance. I am a mom of 2 babies, and they might come up to me in the process as well. So hopefully not too much. So I wanted to start by contextualizing the importance that rice and beans holds in Puerto Rican cuisine. These pictures are from 3 different restaurants. It was when I first started my dissertation fieldwork, I was still trying to figure out what I was doing. So I went around to different restaurants trying to figure out, wait, how is this all connected? And then it suddenly just hit me that in each of these restaurants, something that couldn't be missing is rice and beans. Anything else, any other ingredient, any other dish can vary, but something that in order for it to continue with that legitimacy of Puerto Rican cuisine, it had to include rice and beans. And so, yeah, because with this in mind, one little second. What did I do? With this in mind, everything else can vary. Let's explore the historical trajectory of rice and beans in Puerto Rico. So starting with beans, what we eat as, the traditional beans that we eat in Puerto Rico, as well as in all over the Americans, it's what we know as the common bean, or Phaseolus vulgaris. It had 2 domestication centers in the Andes and Mesoamerica. And the first archaeological evidence of it in Puerto Rico is from 350 to 770 after death. There are more types of beans, but today I will be focusing on the common bean because of the historical and cultural importance in Puerto Rico. And then rice, Oryza species, had also 2 domestication centers around the world. The first was in China, 9,000 years ago, Oryza sativa, which is the more commercial rice that we still eat today. And then in Africa, Oryza glaberrima was also domesticated 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. And the first written text that talks about the introduction of rice to the Antilles is a royal decree from 1512, where King Ferdinand gives orders to bring rice seeds to Hispaniola for sowing, while the first evidence of it being successfully grown in Puerto Rico is from 1535, where Asensio de Villanueva informs that rice had been successfully grown in the town of Utuado. So, and then in Abad, Fray Íñigo Abad y la Sierra, he was a confessor and a personal secretary of the bishop of the diocese of Puerto Rico. He was sent to Puerto Rico in 1772, from 1772 to 1778. And as part of his ecclesiastic duties, he visited many towns throughout the island and kept a diary. In this diary, he recorded the day-to-day life of the Puerto Rican countryside. Among other things, he noted what people ate, the landscapes, animals, and just, different aspects of cultural aspects, social aspects. But important here is that he mentions that the people across the archipelago grew plenty of crops for local subsistence, including rice, beans, manioc, sweet potatoes, corn, plantains, pumpkins, among others. So what does this mean? This means that there is a long-term historical tradition of growing and eating rice and beans in Puerto Rico. Where are we today? So Puerto Rico currently imports 85% of the food that it consumes. In 1920, 92% of the total land area was dedicated to agriculture. In 2022, 102 years later, it was down to 22.6%. What happened? What does this mean for rice and beans? This is clearly a problem, and Hurricane Maria in 2017 definitely exposed these vulnerabilities in the food system that had been a long time coming. With Hurricane Maria, which was a major natural disaster, that really, apologies. We really saw how the dependency on imports became a problem because there wasn't access to the ports, no one to deliver the food products. And because also there's this act called the Jones Act from 1917 that says that Puerto Rico can only import products through US shipping lines. So because of all this impeded aid from other countries, and it really led to the forefront just the state of food insecurity that Puerto Rico had at that moment, and that it in some ways continues to have a lot. So to understand how we got to the present, where we have an island that literally depends on importing food, we have to understand and pay closer attention to the changes that happened in Puerto Rico throughout the 20th century. So my research questions were, how and why did Puerto Rico change from an agricultural archipelago to one that imports 85% of the food that it consumes? As central ingredients to local culinary tradition, what role has rice and beans played in these changes? So the 19th century in Puerto Rico saw the rise of sugarcane haciendas. With the rise of the sugarcane haciendas, more land started to be focusing on sugarcane, or more dedicated on sugarcane production instead of subsistence. This is different from just maybe a decade or so earlier, when Abad y la Sierra had gone around Puerto Rico. He had noticed that there wasn't a lot of large-scale commercial agriculture, but a lot of subsistence agriculture. But then in the 19th century, there was a rise in this commercial agriculture. With more land focusing on commercial production, more subsistence foods needed to be imported. And then in the 20th century, after 1898, that Puerto Rico passed to be a U.S. territory, U.S. Sugar Corporation amassed even more land for sugarcane production. By 1930, Charles Herbert Allen, who had served as the first civilian governor of Puerto Rico, and U.S. banking interests had converted 45% of all arable land to sugarcane plantations. These bank syndicates also owned the insular postal system, the entire coastal railroad, and the international seaport of San Juan. By 1934, 80% of all sugarcane farms in Puerto Rico and their underlying land were owned by the American Sugar Refining Company, today known as Domino Sugar. After the abolition of slavery in 1873, the labor force transitioned from enslaved to agregados and workers. Agregado, which were common in the coffee region, were tended to be given plots of land to cultivate in exchange for agricultural labor. Although they could grow subsistence foods, they had usufruct rights, but not land ownership rights. Company towns were more common in the sugarcane regions. In them, workers were not given plots of land, but were provided a wage in exchange for their labor, which was very low. With this wage, they could buy food at company stores. Rice and beans were some of the most essential ingredients bought by sugarcane worker families because they were cheap, sold in bulk, which were great to feed a family with multiple children. In dried form, they were easy to store and preserve, and they were high in calories, something that was needed for the arduous life of the sugarcane workers. So in these images, these are images from 1942 of sugarcane workers eating in midday. And we can see how in the first image, there's 3 lunch boxes, one with rice, one with beans, and one with papaya. And this type of lunch boxes, we can see it also in the second image. They were nested lunch boxes called fiambreras that are tin enameled, and which were super common across the countryside of Puerto Rico until about maybe like the 70s, maybe later, might be wrong. Oh, we have these images of fiambreras, which is how the sugarcane workers would eat or bring their hot meals for midday in the sugarcane fields. And we also, if you notice in the second image, there's also a little coffee cup, which I'll talk about more in a second. So in 1948, Sidney Mintz, he was an American anthropologist that went to Puerto Rico to study the life of sugarcane workers. He has a passage where he talks about what the sugarcane workers ate, especially, when they were in the fields. I'll read it now, and I highlighted some important parts. As the sun climbs, each woman begins to prepare the hot lunch, which must be carried out to her man in the fields, no matter how far away he may be working. No Puerto Rican cane worker will settle for a cold midday meal. At 9 o'clock, he has his thermos of black coffee and a piece of bread smeared with margarine or topped with a slice of cheese or sausage. He feels it gives him the strength he needs to work till noon. But at noon, someone must bring him a luncheon. Nest pots hung on wire frames are the lunch boxes of the Puerto Rican countryside. Sometimes the pots hold noodle soup or a quantity of starches such as boiled green bananas, taro, yams, and Irish potatoes. Fish broths, cornmeal cakes, and salads mixed with bits of boiled salt cod are common. But no matter what else, one tin container is always full of rice and another of red or white beans in a mild sauce. Rice and beans are the staple of the lower class Puerto Rican. So in this passage, we can see how Sidney Mintz notices the centrality of rice and beans, especially between sugarcane workers and their daily meals. In this image is from 1938. The photographer Edwin Ruskin, he labeled the caption with something very important. He mentions this: rice and beans. This is popular food of the island. When there is enough money available, a few pieces of dried codfish are added for flavor. Every single ingredient is imported from the continental United States. And also in this image from 1942, this is a market in Rio Piedras. We can notice, or we can make out in the image, bananas, coconuts, and also in the bottom, you can see some rice and beans, cloth sacks. And if you zoom in, you can clearly see, you can't make out what all the sacks say, but at least on this one, it says shipped by Bay City Rice Mills, Bay City, Texas. So we can see how rice and beans were commonly imported even in this mid-century. And it's something that I'll return to later in this presentation. So in the 1930s and the 1940s, there were a lot of socioeconomic pressures happening in Puerto Rico. In the 1930s, we had the Great Depression, which obviously affected Puerto Rico as well. We had two major hurricanes hit the island in 1928, 1932. There was a sugarcane workers' strike in 1934, led by a nationalist leader. Then in 1937, there was a massacre in Ponce, which is a town in Puerto Rico. And then something, as a side note, in 1938, the Popular Democratic Party was founded, which will be reported in 1 second. And then in the 1940s, well, obviously we had World War II. In 1941, there was a land reform happening in Puerto Rico, and because 80% of the population was landless. Still, at that moment, 80% of the population did not own land. However, the reform was unsuccessful. And then there was another sugarcane workers' strike in 1942, led by the nationalist leader again. And then in 1944, 1948, the Popular Democratic Party wins elections. And the Popular Democratic Party then initiates Operation Bootstrap. So Operation Bootstrap is a type of development strategy of industrialization by invitation, where the government created economic incentives for foreign companies to come and bring their companies to Puerto Rico. Then they achieved this with tax exemptions and other types of economic incentives and subsidies. And these were limited to foreign corporations, not local corporations. The argument behind Operation Bootstrap was to kind of foment the local economy and local economic growth by bringing this foreign capital. However, because it wasn't building a sound base in the local economy, the social outcomes of what it may have achieved did not have a sound base. So yes, as we will see, and the whole point behind Operation Bootstrap is because of the social economic pressures that I just mentioned. There was a lot of precariousness, a lot of poverty, a lot of hunger in Puerto Rico. And if you read literary works of the period, you'll see how the situation was really bad. So it was a way of trying to better the situation, but in reality, because it wasn't necessarily fomenting the economy from the ground below, it may not have been the most solid ground. And we'll see that in just a second. Or another argument behind Operation Bootstrap was to dismantle the power of the sugarcane industry. So it was thought that by dismantling the power and control of the sugarcane industry, as we just saw, that one company, the American Sugar Refining Company, owed 80% of the sugarcane production in Puerto Rico. So it was thought that by dismantling it in some way, that would improve the situation of the people in Puerto Rico. However, Operation Bootstrap focused on manufacturing companies, and we'll see about that in just one second. So this is, as a reference, this is a land cover map of Puerto Rico in 1951. So that's 4 years up after Operation Bootstrap. And we can see how all the yellow around the island, that's sugarcane. So we can see how a lot of the island was dedicated to sugarcane. And then the brown in the middle, that's coffee. And then anything red around the island, those are military reserves and naval reserves. And then if we look at a map for 2000, we can see how all this agriculture has basically dissipated, and almost all of the land cover area is dedicated to secondary forests, which, could be a good thing. But, let's keep in mind still that Puerto Rico still imports 85% of the food that it consumes, which is, kind of the problem of where we are right now. So for my dissertation, I used government documents. I used censuses of agriculture that were compiled by the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of the Census, and then they passed to the USDA in 1997. And I looked for the acres and weight harvested of 18 crops. And I also looked at annual trade statistics from 1939 to 2018 and focused on the weight that was imported and exported, recorded in these documents for these same 18 foods and food products. So in this graph, just as a summary, I'm not going to talk about all these crops today, but just so you kind of have a general idea, this graph is representing the number of acres harvested for each agricultural product in Puerto Rico from 1919 to 2018. And it's very noticeable how sugarcane and coffee and a little bit corn are the products that have had more acres dedicated to them throughout time. And another thing that you might be noticing is how all the grass for all of these crops tend to go down. Throughout time, they are going down, they're going down, they're going down. Now, focusing a little bit on sugarcane specifically, if we remember, Operation Bootstrap sought to dismantle the power of the sugarcane industry, and this was in 1947. But somehow, in 1949, the sugarcane acres are higher than they were just a decade before. So something to have in mind. This is also the same number of acres across towns. So you can kind of see how these crops are represented across the archipelago. Well, this is specifically for sugarcane. I'll show you others in a second. So this is the darker red towns are the towns that have more acres of sugarcane. And this is for 1919. And this is 1929, 1939, 1949, 1959, 1969, starts to go down, 1978, 1987, and then 1998 was the last census that recorded sugarcane production. And then if we look at rice, let's also have in mind that date of 1947, Operation Bootstrap. Interestingly, just 2 years after Operation Bootstrap, we see how the amount of acres dedicated to rice is significantly lower than a decade before. And it just continued decreasing until 1987, which was the last census to date that recorded rice. So this is the rice across the towns for 1919, 1929, 1939, 1949, 1959, 1982, 1987. And that's the last census that recorded rice. Now, if you look at beans, we can also notice how after 1947, Our acres dedicated to beans also decreased significantly from a decade before. And they continued decreasing until they basically disappeared. This is the acres of beans in 1919, 1929, 1939, 1949, 1959, 1969, 1978, 1987, 1998, 2007, and I couldn't do the 2018 because the way the census reported it, it was by region, so it couldn't be comparable, but the numbers were less than 2007. So, well, we already know the panorama of the acres dedicated to at least these three crops in Puerto Rico throughout this decade. So now let's take a look at the food imported. So this graph is representing the food imported from the United States from 1939 to 2018. We can quickly notice how corn, the amount of corn and corn products, I should specify that it's, coffee and coffee products, coconut and coconut products, because anything that was, a product of it, I summarized it in the same thing. We can notice how corn and corn products, especially in 1998 and 2007, are significantly higher than anything else, and we'll return to that. But apart from corn, we can also notice how rice is consistently imported. It's consistently imported throughout this period. And we also have some importation of sugar, some importation of beans, also beans and tomatoes significantly imported, although in a lesser quantity or a lesser weight, let's say, throughout this whole period. Okay, and then here we have the food that was exported from Puerto Rico to the United States of America from 1939 to 2018. And, it's pretty noticeable. The sugar products have been the ones most exported, but they also have decreased throughout time, which makes sense with the loss of the sugarcane industry after 1998. So now I'd like to just compare, given that we have the acres, sorry, not the acres, we have the pounds that were harvested from the census data, and we also have the pounds that were imported and exported from the trade statistics. I'd like to compare the two side by side. So in the first column, you will find the pounds that were harvested. Specifically, this is rice, but we'll look at others as well. So the pounds that were harvested are rice. And then the second column is showing the pounds that were imported of rice from the United States. This third is imported from foreign countries. And then after that is exported to the United States. So interestingly, I mean, we already saw that rice was consistently imported throughout this period, and from the United States and also from foreign countries. But what is also very interesting is that we have some exportation of rice, even though Puerto Rico is not producing locally any rice. And if we look at beans, we have a similar type of scenario where we see on the first column, the pounds harvested of beans went down to almost completely disappeared. And the other one is bean greens as well. That has always been low, but it's low as well. And then on the third column, we see the pounds imported from the United States, which is also a significant amount of beans being imported and consistently from the United States. And we also have some imported from foreign countries, especially in 2007 and 2018. Also, interestingly, such as was the case with rice, we see exportation of beans from Puerto Rico, which definitely do not come from local harvesting of beans. Now let's take a look at sugarcane. So on sugarcane, also the first two columns is the pounds harvested. The first column is the pounds harvested. The second one is basically taken away 28% that is bagasse, which is the residue behind the sugarcane processing that's basically not usable. So I just put that in there just to, kind of have that as a reference. But what is weird about the sugarcane is that even though there was a lot of sugarcane production, there was not a lot of exportation of sugar products. We can see that there's some exportation up until 1970 about, and then it almost disappears. But it does not compare with all that was harvested. So where was all this sugar going? We'll return to that in 1 second. And now let's take a look at corn specifically, which appeared to be an important imported product. We can see that the pounds of corn harvested have not been much. And then the corn that was imported started increasing significantly in 1969, 1970. And then it had a spike in 1998 and 2007, and then decreased a bit in 2018. What does this mean? Like corn? We'll talk about that in 1 second. So what this all is probably pointing to is to the use of the production of manufactured food products, which, rice and beans, and also sugar and corn, possibly as added sugars, preservatives, and everything that, that manufacturing companies use just to make their products, what do you call them? Standardized. Sugar is heavily used in the manufacturing industry for preservatives, for flavor, for many other things. So it makes, if we take a look at the manufacturing industry, also, I'm not talking about rum here, but rum is also another avenue that the sugar could have gone. But today I'll be focusing on manufacturing industry and specifically Goya Foods. So Goya Foods, this is the facility today of Goya Foods in Puerto Rico. It's located in Bayamón. Goya Foods first arrived to Rio Piedras, and then it moved to its current location in Bayamón, where it has stayed since. But I'll back it up for 1 second. So Goya was founded in New York City by the Unanue family, which were Spanish immigrants in 1936. Goya products were sold in NYC bodegas. And then with Operation Bootstrap not only focused on bringing foreign capital to Puerto Rico, but it also created programs so that Puerto Ricans could migrate to the United States to work on farms, factories, and many other types of settings. So it saw the rise of the migration of Puerto Ricans outside of the island. And then with Puerto Ricans arriving to New York City in large numbers in 1947, in the years from 1947 after, Goya found a new niche in the Puerto Rican migrants. In 1945, there were 13,600 Puerto Ricans living in the United States. By 1948, that's 3 years later, the figure was at 32,800. So that's more than double the amount of Puerto Ricans. So Goya arrives to Puerto Rico in 1949, also to take advantage of these economic incentives, and founds the Puerto Rico Food Products Corporation. And the focus of it would be to create Puerto Rican specialty products. To receive the economic incentives, their products could not be ones already produced at industrial scale in Puerto Rico. That's why they were interested in canning cooked pigeon peas, beans, meals such as soups, pasteles, packaging dried beans and rice, and making tropical fruit juices and pastes such as guava paste. At the time, the Puerto Rico Food Products Corporation was unique because its focus was making food products with ingredients sourced from Puerto Rico, for example, fruits, vegetables, and tubers, which temporarily benefited the local agricultural industries. However, the factory depended on agricultural harvests in Puerto Rico to be able to produce their products. As time went on, the lack of consistency became a problem for keeping up with the Goya demand for Goya products. And as local subsistence agriculture decreased in Puerto Rico with the lack of government support, importing ingredients to create their products became necessary. So these are some of the products that are produced today in the Goya factory in Bayamón. And we can notice here rice, beans, tomato sauce, sofrito, tropical fruit punch, pasta sauce, etc. And all of these products are produced with imported ingredients because, as we have seen, the local agriculture is not producing much rice, beans, tomatoes, or anything just to be able to produce these products on a large scale. Now, returning to the issue of sugar and corn, it seems very likely that where all of this sugar and this corn was going was into the manufacturing industry, which is not only Goya, but I'm using Goya here as an example because of its importance within Puerto Rican cultural imaginaries about cuisine and Puerto Rican cuisine. But I just put this as a reference. That was I weighed some sugar just so you can kind of visualize what 23 grams of added sugar looks like. Not look like a lot, right? It's it's a little bit of sugar. However, imagine that you have a huge factory with rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of products being consistently made every day. Then it seems necessary to have a consistent and big amount of sugar or preservatives or corn, fructose, whatever it is that is being used for those products. So that's why part of what I argue in my dissertation is that probably where all of this sugar cane that wasn't being exported was through to the manufacturing industry, and also all this corn that was suddenly being imported, possibly a lot of it also went to the manufacturing industry. So what does this all mean for local cuisine? To think about local cuisine, I took a look specifically to cookbooks. So these are 3 different cookbooks. One is from 1950, one is from 1954, and from 1994. At first, when I started looking at the cookbooks, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to find in them. I thought there might have been some technology differences throughout time, maybe more canned products in the later cookbooks, which is definitely something that I found. But something that was very much like a turning point in my conception of rice and beans in Puerto Rico is that 1950 recipe has only three basic ingredients. It's beans, pumpkin, and sofrito. There's no tomato sauce in the original recipe. Then in the second recipe, we see how tomato sauce is optional. You can add tomato sauce, but it's not necessary. But it still has the beans, the pumpkin, and the sofrito, which are the basic ingredients. And then by 1994, we see how tomato sauce is no longer optional. It's now necessary in the last recipe, as well as it has many other products that you can add, like annatto oil, smoked ham. What else did it have? Alcaparrado, just many other ingredients that now become easier to access. So yes, that was something that was noticeably different. Was the tomato sauce became a necessary part. Well, before it was simply pumpkin. And also I've seen recipes more recent that don't even include pumpkin. They replace the pumpkin for potatoes, which are not grown, or actually there might be some local production, but they're mostly like a polar climate product. So with that in mind, I want to take a look at both the data for tomatoes and pumpkins. So in this graph, we can see how the pounds harvested of tomatoes is basically nothing compared to the pounds imported from the United States and even from foreign countries. And even there's a lot of exportation of tomato products ever since the 1980s. So we can see how ever since the 1980s, there's also been a significant number of tomato products being exported to both the United States and foreign countries. So that probably ties in with this manufacturing of tomato products, such as tomato sauce and pasta sauce. And when we look at the data for pumpkins, it is definitely a very different panorama than all of the ones that we've been looking at with rice, beans, sugarcane, and corn. We can see how pumpkins has remained a product locally produced. The data missing from what years? Let me see. From the 1970s to 1980s, it's not that there was no local production, it's just that it wasn't mentioned in the census. So it could have been none, or there could have been some production. So that's something that we don't have, but we can definitely see how different from all the other products in the 1990s, there is a rise of pumpkins locally harvested. And even though they go down in 2018, they're still pretty high compared to what they were producing in 1939 and 1949. And also, interestingly, there's not a lot of pumpkins being imported. So that's also a big difference with all of the other ones that we've looked at today. And I also have data for the other tubers that I mentioned at the beginning, but there was not going to be time today. So conclusions. What does it mean to eat a plate of rice and beans in Puerto Rico composed of imported ingredients? So the economic and environmental transformation in the 20th century created an archipelago of consumers for U.S. products. And with the absence of local agricultural production, cooking traditional food became tied to the consumption of imported ingredients. I argue that this was a major driving force in changing food and agricultural practices in Puerto Rico in the past century. However, where ingredients come from matters. I argue that reconnecting Puerto Rican cooking and cuisine ideals with their deep historical and cultural traditions tied to land-based gardening and farming practices, returning the ingredients themselves before the products, may be key to achieving wider scale support of small-scale farmers working towards food sovereignty across the archipelago. This in itself may be key to enacting large-scale transformation and pressuring policy changes. What we choose to buy has power. Also, I maintain that rice and beans is not the problem in itself, but ensuring that Puerto Rico is able to feed itself is a key step towards social justice, liberation, and an antidote to food imperialism. As a discipline that focuses on studying our material history, historical archaeology can help inform how we got to where we are and what changes can be made towards better futures. So it's important to support local farmers and the food sovereignty movement happening in Puerto Rico. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for that incredible presentation. We'd love to open the floor now for any questions or comments. So feel free to drop questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, turn your camera on, or use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, now is the chance to ask questions or any other comments. Or if you're hungry, that also counts. I sure do want to eat a plate of rice and beans right now. I guess, Natasha, while everybody's thinking on their questions, I wanted to ask if there are any um, organizations that you would recommend we follow or support to contribute to Puerto Rico's food sovereignty.
Yes, so there's many, but I would definitely suggest the Proyecto Agroecológico El Josco Bravo. They have a farming, agroecological farming school that they do every year. It's completely free. You just have to pay like a forget the English name, una cuota.
A fee? A fee?
Yeah, like a little fee, but they have been very successful in just teaching anyone who wants to learn about agroecological farming how to do it. And so I would definitely suggest Proyecto Agroecológico El Josco Bravo and also Organización Boricua, which is a major organization that organizes all of the farmers across Puerto Rico. And there's plenty more. I'm blanking out, but those are two good ones to start.
Thank you so much.